Today we're presenting Healing Racial Violence and Oppression, the Power of Consciousness and Communication, presented by Shani. So now I want to go ahead and introduce our presenter, Shani Saxon. Shani is our Director of Healing at One Love Global. She is also the founder and executive director of Kids Turning Corners Incorporated, which addresses mental and physical well-being for young people of color, especially those who are uninsured and underinsured. As a passionate social activist of social justice and as a licensed social worker, Shani is committed to helping underserved populations and communities achieve their potential through advocacy, equity, and inclusion. The majority of Shani's ongoing research focuses on the disparities of mental health accessibility and experiences of Black women with severe mental health diagnoses using ethnographic research and narrative analysis. So we're going to be hearing more about those areas of expertise from Shani today. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Shani. I will unmute you. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate that. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy that technology is allowing us to get together despite the fact that, you know, we're dealing with kind of an epidemic right now. And, you know, I want to encourage all of you to, you know, make sure that you're doing self-care. You know, anxiety and fear can quickly arise. So make sure that you are creating, you know, self-care lists and tips and that you're implementing them every single day. But I also think that, you know, on the verge of this particular epidemic, it's important that we learn to address and we talk about some of the items that are things that are happening in our community right now that are preventing people that we love, people that we work with, our clients, patients, you name it, from having access. And, you know, today's conversation is extremely important. We're talking about what healing racial violence really looks like, and going from there. I don't want to neglect recognizing my partner, Dr. Maria Sosolski. She did aid in creating a lot of this content for this PowerPoint. So I just want to give a shout out to her. She is someone that I work with closely, and we do a lot of healing racial violence and oppression work throughout Michigan and the DC area, Washington. We've been to Florida, I think, once or twice. And, you know, we work really closely with Michigan State University Continuing Education Office as well, presenting continuing education. So just want to get started on this because we have an hour, and as most of you already know, having a conversation about race and violence and oppression and what that looks like it obviously takes longer than an hour. So we're going to get through as much of this as we can. And this is just a way for us to begin having conversations about racial violence. Oh, I'm not moving to the next slide. Sorry, give me a second. There we go. All right, so the goals for today are to promote equal opportunities for people of color and marginalized community members and put my knowledge into action. Simply, you know what you know, and what you don't know can also be a detriment to each and all of us. And overall, we just want to start a conversation. You know, I'm in a lot of spaces that I really consider progressive, and I have to deal with microaggressions every single day. And these are from people that mean well, and from people that, in my estimation, should also know better. So that I think that when we come together and we're having healing circles and we're talking about the barriers that, you know, young people of color, that marginalized people experience, you know, we also have people who consider themselves allies and advocates that still sometimes struggle with their own biases. So that'll also be part of our conversation as well. Sarah, feel free to interrupt if there are questions that are coming up that I may or may not get to see. Please, thank you so much. Please add any questions to the list, and feel free to interrupt if there are any questions that are asked of me while I'm going through this PowerPoint. So what we can do and what we want to do are two different things. This slide here just talks about what we want to do. We want to talk about group membership and identity and consequences of identity-based marginalization. We also want to make an impact where we are. You know, we are in a community that is diverse. We establish events with diverse people, and we want to make sure that we are giving as much pertinent information to every person that we come in contact with that will allow them to use those tools to go out and spread education and information to people so that we can begin to change our communities and then also change at the local, state, and federal levels as well. We also want to reboot our own sense of self. You know, we are not powerless. You know, this upcoming election is an indicator that we do hold power, whether we're exercising our right to vote or whether we're exercising our right to, you know, have conversations, meet up with each other, and talk about what's happening in our economy, talking about what's happening in our neighborhoods. So just know that we are not powerless. We also want to affect change. You know, together we are powerful. That is why we're coming together in this venue, this by technology here. You know, we want to learn more. We want to be able to offer each other options for taking care of ourselves, taking care of our communities. And the only way we're going to do that is by working together. So this conversation, it tends to happen in two parts. And where it gets really tricky for me is that, you know, we want to do some consciousness raising, but we also want to do some cross-cultural communication for healing. And again, I want to reiterate, this is a conversation that should happen over and over again. This is 1 hour and it is a very short 1 hour. So, you know, I'm not going to plow through this, but I want to at least take a moment to give some essential information to you with the time that we have. You know, I want you all to be able to describe the nature and context of violence, whether we're talking about like hate crimes or bullying, major and micro aggressions against identity, you know, culture, someone's racial and ethnic identity, as well as, you know, marginalized groups. I also want you to be able to identify strategies for developing culturally centered and anti-oppressive leadership in agencies and systems. One Love Global is a pioneer and is progressive and innovative in creating systems and processes that are helping to dismantle these kind of oppressive agencies and systems that prevent people from having access. And then I also want you to create strategies that promote emotional liberation and wellness among people across the spectrum of diverse groups based on their race or ethnicity, based on religion, gender, sexual identity, and other identities. It's so varied. But we want to be able to add to the dialogue, and we want to be able to add to the discussion so that people feel comfortable talking about race, talking about oppression, talking about, you know, stories and instances in their lives where they've had a really difficult time and they just did not know how to be responsive and to be reactive. So most recently, there was a headline, you know, national news, how racism became a public health crisis in Pittsburgh. And I thought, wow, how wonderful. You know, Sarah and I talked about it a little bit. And, you know, researchers had found that in Pittsburgh, every dollar that a white man earned, white women earned 78 cents, while Black women earned 54 cents. Real simple, nothing that we all don't know. It also noted that Black women are 5 times more likely to live in poverty than white men, and that the white life expectancy is around 8 years longer than Black, and that death rates for cardiovascular disease and cancer are substantially higher among African Americans. Now, that's a problem. And what I really value about this kind of mandate that Pittsburgh and Madison and Milwaukee implemented is that it's going to lead to new legislation that will create more racial equity and opportunities for hiring practices, diversity initiatives, and implement additional policies at the federal level that will help reduce some racism and health inequities. I don't know if any of you watch New Amsterdam. It's kind of my new favorite show to watch. I think it's an ABC show, if I'm not mistaken. But I watched a recent show, and it was talking about Izzy, who is a psychiatrist at New Amsterdam. And of course, New Amsterdam is no different than like Grey's Anatomy. However, I think that they take a much more intensive twist on mental health in this particular show. And I also think that they deal a lot with issues around people of color and people who are marginalized, specifically those who are dealing with health issues and health crises. And I really value that. And so Izzy happens to be the psychiatrist And, I wanted to be able to share a video, but because of time limitations, I wasn't able to. But, if you get a chance, I'd really love for you to even kind of search up that episode and kind of watch it, because basically it just kind of describes that, this young person, this 15-year-old comes in and he's experiencing, these symptoms associated with what he thought was a health crisis. But Izzy, the psychiatrist, figured out that no, this is not necessarily a health crisis. It's one of those things where this young person was not talking about the aggressions, the micro and the macro aggressions that he was experiencing at school for being a person of color. And he ended up becoming sick because of how aware he was in this world around him that racism was existing. He couldn't put a name to what he was feeling and why he was feeling it, but it was there. And his stress and anxiety ultimately gave him tumors that required medical doctors to remove it. And when Iggy wanted to bill for it, he was told that he couldn't bill for racism because it wasn't a diagnosis. And he was essentially saying, well, why isn't it a diagnosis? And I thought that was really progressive. I thought it was great that this conversation was happening because, as a clinician, I see young people every single day people of color who are dealing with the effects of society and how it's impacting their psyche, how it's impacting their overall health. We talk about psychosomatic responses. We talk about inflammation in the body. We talk about the physiological things that are happening to them as a result of what I would consider these types of racial micro and macro aggressions. So if you haven't had a chance to watch it, please do so. And again, this whole precedent that's being set in Madison and Milwaukee and Pittsburgh, passing this legislation in 2019, I believe it was, it's drawing from these kind of medical authorities, real life medical authorities, and they're beginning to agree that racism is a threat to African American health. And certainly other people's health, marginalized communities in general. So I want to be really clear that we're talking about people of color in marginalized communities. So consciousness is where we begin. And you'll see right here that I made a reference to Pinky and the Brain. And I don't know how many people here are old enough to remember Pinky and the Brain that are on this webinar. But, they would always come together. This was a rat and a mouse. And, they were unlikely friends, and they developed this kind of friendship because they were both two very different people, and they were living in a world, and their friendship allowed them to, figure out how to coexist. And I really love that. And as a little girl, I watched this cartoon, and I resonated with it at a very young age because I thought, wow, how cool, these two unlikely characters, became friends, and they're trying to coexist in the world. And not only are they trying to coexist, they're also trying to figure out how to take over the world. So I reference Pinky and the Brain a lot in my presentations because I think, as much as we have to take this serious, sometimes we have to add a little light as well. So the system of inequity. This was taken from one of the websites that I use. It's not the Southern Poverty, it's World Trust, I'm sorry. So World Trust is an organization that does a lot of work nationally and internationally. And I use one of their pictures here, one of their photos here, because I love the demonstration, how they demonstrate what the system of inequity looks like and how it's embedded deeply in history, culture, and identity. And, World Trust has a kind of a holistic frame that shows the continual interaction between the internal, which is kind of like our personal stuff that we're dealing with, and the external, which is generally our interpersonal, our structural, and our institutional manifestations of bias that we have, and that we try to every single day to deal with, and that we should be aware of every single day. This self-perpetuating system, it's interrupted at both the internal and external levels. So as you can kind of see in the image that I have up there, it must be interrupted at both the internal and the external levels for lasting change to occur. And the importance of continual self-work to understand and heal our own kind of internalized privilege and oppression. It's integral in the ability of scholars, individuals who work at all levels of government and change makers to analyze and dismantle the systemic inequity that is preventing people to have access to, that's preventing people from being able to take care of their own needs in a world, in a society that has more than enough to share. And so, I offer this kind of frame to support my own personal insight and renewal, as well as my desire to want to build capacity to analyze inequity in education and healthcare, especially the mental health field, because it's particularly important to me, and the judicial system as well. And then just in terms of like food security. And again, this kind of coronavirus pandemic is another demonstration of how food insecurity and financial instability and not having access to adequate health care or uninsured or underinsured, and even having a lack of education is pivotal, and is also kind of turning our society upside down, and pretty much, we're kind of doing a tailspin back into a recession. So it's driven by and it's moved by power and economics, and it's largely invisible, but and it's unexamined and it's unquestioned. And why is it unexamined? Why is it unquestioned? And these are things that I want you to take away. These are thoughts that I want you to be able to take away as we continue having these discussions is, why are we not examining this kind of internal, external system of inequity? Why are we not figuring out ways to work to deal with the power and the economics, culture and identity that's preventing us from taking care of ourselves and being able to take care of our families and being able to take care of people who are vulnerable? Our culture tends to avoid identifying and analyzing policies and arrangements that help sustain inequity. We need to seek support, both intellectually and spiritually. I think that's extremely important for those who are addressing, kind of the racialized patterns and policies and practices that generate differences in our own well-being. So the internal components here, it consists of bias, it consists of privilege and internalized racism. I'm thinking of Joy DeGruy, and I may be pronouncing her name inappropriately, but her first name is Joy. Her last name is spelled Degruy, and she's the author of Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And I watched a video that the World Trust Organization put up on their website maybe a couple of years ago, and Joy, she really described an experience that she had in a grocery store some years back. And, she was with her sister-in-law, who was a mixed biracial woman, and had just recently moved to the area. And Joy had been living in this area for multiple years and had been going to the same grocery store for multiple years. Her sister-in-law came to visit and had been visiting and decided to move there. And she was biracial, but she looked very much like a white woman. And, she goes through and she pays with a check, and the cashier does not ask her for ID, doesn't do anything other than give her smiles and is kind to her and lets her go through. And when Joy goes through as a woman who absolutely looks like a woman of African descent, she is asked for her ID, and then she's also, even more disrespected in her opinion, because now the cashier is being cold and distant toward her. She's not being warm and fuzzy, with her customer service. And then she pulls out the bad checklist, and she's just kind of embarrassing Joy at this grocery store. And Joy has her 10-year-old daughter with her, who also has recognized the shift in the communication style of this cashier. And it just really breaks down how we really need to do better at dealing with our own biases, because despite the fact that Joy had lived in this community and had frequented this grocery store for years, she was being mistreated because of because of the color of her skin, whereas her sister-in-law, who looked like a white woman, was not treated in that way. And when she brought it to the attention of the cashier and asked for the manager, there was obviously some uncomfortable conversations that happened. And it would have gotten more uncomfortable had two white older women who were behind her, had they not said, I cannot believe this is happening, and kind of spoke up. So we also have to recognize that we need to use our own privilege sometimes to dismantle racism and micro and macroaggressions when we see them. The external components operate through institutions, structures within and among groups, and they inform interpersonal, institutional, and structural relationships. And what I would love to show you is kind of a clip from a Blackish episode. And again, if you have not watched Blackish, I'd encourage you to give it a shot. It's kind of a fun sitcom. It's with Black leads in it. And this particular clip I'm thinking of happened in February. I'm sorry, I take that back. The clip was February 2016. However, they were talking about the inauguration of President Barack Obama at the time, and when he got out of the car, out of the limousine, and we all kind of held our breath when he got out of the limousine, when he was being confirmed, and he was just kind of waving at the people. And we all kind of held our breath thinking that, at any moment, someone is going to shoot him. At any moment, someone's going to take the life of this president before he can even begin his term. And, we're talking about how institutions and structures really impact our relationships, our ability to be excited about change. And, Barack Obama was a symbol of change at that point. And we needed that kind of change, but boy, were we scared that at any point in time, his life was going to be taken from him. His wife, his children, were going to be threatened as a result of it. So we also have to be really cognizant of our own behavior as people, as citizens, that even at the external level, we are still experiencing those interpersonal, institutional, and structural racism that prevent us from being able to be excited about the change that we see. So again, making sure that we address that in our day-to-day, in our meetings, in our group settings that we're in as we're trying to deal with the system of inequity. So here is just a culmination. I was thinking about the consequences of discrimination and inequality and underrepresentation. And so my partner, Dr. Sosolsky, and I, we were just kind of like thinking of, just kind of images that we can just put together so that you can get a visual of what's happening at this level. And, most Americans, as a country, I guess, we have yet to achieve racial equality. We know this. I don't think that any of us that are in this group are arguing that, but we're trying to figure out what continuing to make changes for Blacks and having equal rights and things look like. What do Americans see as contributors to economic equality? So, we went to the Pew Research Center, and we just kind of pulled up a couple of data sets to help you all just kind of get an idea about, the deficiencies in our community and our politics with regard to people of color. One of the things that I found really interesting, even as a person of color, is the whole Hidden Figures. I have a picture up here of the person who was playing Katherine Johnson in the Hidden Figures movie, and I was thinking, wow, I consider myself a person who is, a lifelong educator, and I'm always trying to immerse myself in learning, and I recognize that I will be learning the rest of my life because every day I find something new or I read something new that I find is really impactful. And when that movie came out, and I heard about Katherine Johnson, who was a mathematician, and she was like essentially NASA's human computer and an unsung hero regarding the space journey in those days. I was amazed and shocked, and I'm like, why do I not know this information? And I think about history, and I think about how we suppress information and knowledge, and the damage that it's doing to not only myself, who is trying to be a scholar and an academic, and what it's doing to our young people, and generation after generation of their inability to get factual and pertinent information that is going to change the trajectory of our society. And so this is just kind of an image that I wanted you all to see. Recently, Katherine Johnson, I'm sorry, she's recently passed away, and may she rest in peace. But, I just want you to know that she was really important, and I think that she needs to be revered, and I think that she also needs to be, you know, added to history as it stands and be taught in history classes. So how are we doing, Sarah, on time? I know that we're about halfway through. Any questions that I need to address before I move on?
Not so far. Just a reminder for everyone, if you want to add something, you can click the chat button at the bottom of your screen and then type your message on the right if you have any questions up to this point or onward.
All right, thank you so much. So racism as a social determinant of health, cumulative effects of stress. The reason why I really want to continue to talk about this and move this conversation forward is, you know, the effects of stress related to bias and discrimination and oppression are really real. And they're happening again individually, institutionally, and culturally. And, you know, there's so much research that talks about lower life satisfaction and lower achievement and likelihood of getting a higher education, especially among African American youth. And as a clinician, you know, I remember somewhere around 2016, 2017, I was getting a ton of referrals from the counseling center with, you know, from young people of color. And they were showing up at my office and they were really just having a hard time. Like anxiety was spiked. They were having feelings of depression. They weren't motivated. They were feeling kind of helpless and hopeless. And so I'm kind of doing like, you know, my PHQ-9 depression screening, the things that we do. That's one of the first things we do. We assess, you know, just to kind of figure out what's going on. Is this person who is presenting with some type of you know, emotional issues? Is there a presenting mental health issue that's happening? Because there, you know, there's a plethora of options here. And lo and behold, as we continue to talk, you know, I'm getting, you know, feedback from them about how, you know, I'm being inundated with social media updates and news about, you know, the killings of unarmed Black men. And then I'm discovering that, oh my gosh, look, yes, you're experiencing symptoms that are really related to kind of like post-traumatic stress disorder. And why are you experiencing that? Because as a person of color, you're living in a community, whether we're talking about our community of Lansing, East Lansing, or whether we're talking about the Michigan State University community, where people are dying around you on a regular and consistent basis, and it seems to be no regard for that. It's move on, life as usual. However, you're getting phone calls from your aunt, your mother, your family members, you and your friends are talking, and you're all just trying to deal with the fact that a multitude of young people and older people are dying at the hands of police and people who are racist, and especially I'm sorry, 2016 and 17. It just was so heightened, and I remember it so clearly, thinking like, when is it going to end? You know, the Trayvon Martin, even when Trayvon Martin was murdered, I specifically personally remember having a meeting, a board meeting. It was a strategic planning meeting when I was a consultant for the state of Michigan, and I'm the only person of color in a room full of, it was probably about, in a room full of white people, about 20 of us in a boardroom, and we're doing strategic planning. And this is the day after Zimmerman was acquitted. And I was so deflated, and I could just feel it in my body, and I was just sad. And I had to go to this meeting, and I am the one person of color in this entire room. And I remember getting a text from one of my colleagues who was also a social worker at that point, and she's at the other end of the table, and she's just like, Shani, how are you doing? And I'm just like, I'm okay. I think I'm deflated. And she's like, what's going on? And I told her, I'm like, you know, the news of what happened with Trayvon Martin and that his murderer was acquitted is really, really impacting me right now. And, you know, she affirmed me as much as she could, and she empathized as much as she could, but no one mentioned it. It was news. Not one of my colleagues outside of her mentioned it. And I just thought, wow, are we really going to just dismiss this experience? So those effects related to bias, discrimination, and oppression are huge. These experiences are impacting the way that young people are able to move in this world, are able to feel good about themselves, their own identity. So, you know, and microaggressions are happening, and then not so microaggressions. And one of the not so microaggressions that I think about is kind of like the time when that wrestler, I think this was early 2019, if I'm not mistaken, but, you know, don't trust me on that fact, but I believe it was early 2019, where the wrestler was forced to cut his locks, And there was this video that came out about this high school wrestler in Jersey who was first forced to cut his dreadlocks. And of course, you know, there was some rules around, you know, how much hair you could have. And this young man had historically, I guess, in his wrestling career, had been able to wear kind of like this little stocking cap that would allow him to push his locks up and prevent, you know, his opponent from pulling on him, or, you know, them being pulled out accidentally. And so there was this whole thing where this wrestling official essentially said you have to either cut them or you have to forfeit, and he didn't want to forfeit. But the image of watching, you know, this woman cut his locks was really hard. And, you know, those of you who have seen this video and remember it, I know that you all probably felt the same way. You know, in the State Division on Civil Rights, they did an investigation and they found that, you know, that this referee required the hair, even though he said I required the hair covering, but they also recognized that they were distinctly singling out Black wrestlers, Black athletes. So as a result of that, you know, I think he was refused to be able to referee for about 2 years, and more specifically referee any wrestling matches with that particular school. And I have not had a chance to follow up on much more of that. So if there's any updates, please feel free to add updates to that. Preventative, protective factors, you know, there's some good news here. You know, have stress and a strong sense of identity. There's a greater likelihood of participation in social change and activism. That's what we're all doing right now. So yes, we're all stressed out and we're all trying to figure out, you know, how to maintain our own identity, despite the fact that, you know, we live in a society where there's a ton of racism. You know, so there is some good news there that we can all, you know, find ourselves having conversations about the social determinants of health and the cumulative effects of stress on ourselves. We're also dealing with collective efficacy here, cohesion, trust, agency, our own autonomy. You know, it's allowing us to have greater life satisfaction. I know that there's a place that I can go to and I can talk to people about, you know, being microaggressed, being macroaggressed, you know, experiencing racism, just talking about, you know, news, you know, recent news. I know that there's a place that I can go to. That's one of the reasons why I love going to, you know, hang out with my colleagues and peers and friends at One Love Global, is because that is collective efficacy at its finest. So making sure that you have those spaces and that you have people that you can sit and talk with, so that you can take care of yourself and that you're not allowing the stresses of racism to permeate your body and cause unnecessary inflammation. So what can we do? The short of it, you know, and I'll squeeze all of this in 20 minutes. You know, cross-cultural communication and healing. This quote here is brilliant plan, Pinky. Oh no, wait, what if we want to use a plan that works? You know, we're all trying to join in on these conversations to try to create processes so that people can begin to understand the impact that racism is having at a cross-cultural and community level, world level. We're all trying to do that, you know, and you know, we all know that there have been programs, events, conversations, discussions, even policies, you know, that have been implemented. And some of them have worked, some of them have worked for a short period of time. You know, collectively, there's budgets that unfortunately don't get a chance to even see out some of the planning. So we have to be mindful of that. So what I wanted to ask you all, you know, if you can even take a moment to even type in the chat box, is what does this car mean to you? This is a picture of a car. You see the title is implicit bias. It's a sports car. What does this mean to you? Is there anybody, you know, could you just type in just for a moment, what does this mean to you? And if you can, Sarah, can you just kind of read any of those responses off to me? Like, what do you see in this picture? What does this mean? What does this picture mean to you? Is there anything that's coming up, a feeling that's coming up?
Kendra says wealth and status.
Okay.
Dan says extravagant wealth.
Ah,
Rosalie says they have money to burn, ...
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate that. You're absolutely, all of those are right. Is there
Yep,
another one?
Simone says ego.
Ooh, ego. That's a
Miles says
strong one.
environmental degradation.
Oh, yes. Good. Good. Absolutely. And the answer is probably yes to all of those, depending on your perception. You know, for some people, it could mean freedom, you know, like, hey, I worked really hard, I've retired, the kids are out of the house, you know, I got a few extra dollars, and I have been wanting to get this sports car for years. For some people, it could just really symbolize freedom. For others, it could like the environmental degradation, it could symbolize pollution. You know, here's another thing on the road that is built to go fast but is polluting our air. And someone also mentioned the status piece. It could also mean status. Hey, I have a lot of money to burn, and I'm going to show you just how much of it I have to burn. So it could mean anything. And you know, implicit bias obviously refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding. You know, and I put this picture up because I just wanted to demonstrate implicit bias at the very simplest level. You know, I could go up and away with bias, and you know, and continue to hammer in what our biases are. But I think that you get it. I think that everyone who's on this call kind of understands what implicit bias is. And we have our own understanding, and we act and make decisions sometimes in a really unconscious manner. So if you're walking down this road and you see this car, you are inevitably going to make a favorable or an unfavorable assessment about what this car means to you. Now imagine if that is a person of color, or imagine if that is someone who is marginalized. You know, we're still doing that, and sometimes we just do it very unconscious. We have to be mindful of that, and that's where self-awareness absolutely needs to come in. You know, but the good news is that implicit bias and biases in general tend to be malleable. You know, our brains, we're complex people. We're very smart, intellectual people. For the most part, or at least I'd like to think that. So, you know, we can begin to gradually unlearn some of our biases, especially, you know, things that we've learned in our own houses growing up. You know, growing up with people who may or may not have had racist attitudes, or you know, just really closed thought processes. You know, we can debunk a lot of this, but we have to do the heavy lifting of doing that. So if it's not this car, what else are you having a bias about? And is that bias healthy? Or is it unhealthy? Is this something that you need to check yourself about? Is this something that you need to have a conversation about with other people? You know, and I think that it would behoove us at some point in time to maybe even have a conversation, or maybe even a healing circle around our biases, you know, a deeper healing circle around our biases. I also sometimes will show a picture of Snoop Dogg and Martha Stewart, and it just says, you know, which one of these people is a convicted felon? You know, because again, those people who don't know who Snoop Dogg and Martha Stewart are, and they don't know about her going to prison, sometimes will automatically point to Snoop Dogg. So just things to think about here. All right, so we have, let me just checking my time here. All right, so we have 15 minutes, so we're doing really good on time here. But you know, one of the reasons why we're having this webinar is we really want to talk about ways in which we can help and take care of ourselves, and how can we respond, you know, if something should happen. How do we respond? It is so difficult to have conversations about race and bigotry and, you know, biases. It's really difficult. People feel really uncomfortable. I'm in rooms all the time with people who are just uncomfortable having conversations about, you know, racism, or divisiveness, and, you know, just separation in general. And I think that, you know, we have to create incident response methods. And the Southern Poverty Law Center, you know, they have a whole lot. If you've not been on their website, I'd really encourage you to get on their website. It is just so much information on there. And I've been using information and graphics from the Southern Poverty Law Center for years. And, you know, one of their incident response methods is their speak up and responding to everyday bigotry. And so it's really common to hear, you know, what if I say something wrong? Because I know that there are people who do not want to speak up in certain forums because they think that they may be saying something wrong. And even more common, you know, I didn't want to say, so I didn't say anything. What does that mean? Sarah, I see that people are adding to the conversation. Do you want to share any of that before I go on?
Sure. Lillian just added a comment. I believe that this car is less about bias per se and more about values and morality, and not in any particular direction.
Okay, got you. Thank you so much, Lillian. So was that the last one?
Yep.
Okay, gotcha. So, even more common, I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. And that can be just as dangerous as speaking up. So I'm going to encourage you all to speak up if there are any instances in your life where people are expressing or talking about race in a way that's unhealthy. You know, I definitely recall having a seminar where a younger person was talking to me about the loss of her grandfather recently, and he had raised her. Her parents weren't in the picture, and her grandfather essentially raised her. And she was just devastated because she's like, I loved him, I adored him. And then she also shared that he also was a racist, you know, and this is a person who is in grad school as a non-traditional student, trying to get MSW in social work because she's trying to be a change. And she says it was one of the most difficult times in my life as I, you know, grew up and my consciousness became healthier. And I recognized that, you know, the problem was not that people of color and people who are marginalized were a danger. She said it became clear to me that it was my grandfather who was dangerous, you know. And so she said she had a really hard time toward the end of his life because, you know, he was so set in his ways that he just never really changed his mindset. He didn't understand why she was going to school to be a social worker, you know, because she was trying to help those people. You know, she wasn't going to get anywhere, and she was going to burn out and just spin her wheels. And those are times where, you know, I know that she probably felt extremely uncomfortable having that conversation, but she felt so safe. And I was so thankful that, you know, we created a safe room that she could actually talk about the fact that she would sit at the table at Thanksgiving and talk, and her father, her great aunt would talk about, you know, people of color in a derogatory way. So speaking up when you need to. So the 6 steps that you can do, real clear: be ready. Just be ready. And to be ready means educate yourself, you know, have conversations, you know, kind of empower yourself to speak up if you need to. Identify the behavior. You know, it is clear to me that I'm sitting at a table with someone and they are talking about people of color in a derogatory way. So this is the behavior. I'm identifying it, and I've decided that it's not okay. Appeal to principles. You know, is this an educational moment? I can educate, so I can educate this person, and, you know, see if maybe that my principles will appeal to them. And then you can set limits. Setting limits is boundary setting. You know, I absolutely refuse to continue to have this conversation. It is not helpful. It is not going anywhere. It's inappropriate. You know, it's racist. I mean, you can use the language and you can use the words. Find an ally, be an ally. You know, our jobs as helpers, as humans, is to help others. So you get to be an ally. You know, and if you need to find an ally, find them. You know, the people that are part of this conversation, the people that are part of One Love Global, you know, we're all allies. You know, we're advocates, we're allies, we're helpers, we're here. And then lastly, be vigilant. You know, making sure that you are not only taking care of yourself, but that you are taking care of other people, you know, because we never have any idea whose lives we're impacting. And sometimes it's a moment, sometimes it's a conversation, sometimes it's a movement. The Speak Up Pledge is another one that I think is really awesome in pledging to respond to like everyday bigotry, racism. You know, I know bigotry is a huge word and it's a big word, but, you know, I really like confrontation, and I like it in a healthy way, not in an oppressive way or an aggressive way. But you know, the Speak Up Pledge is really important. So in pledging to respond to everyday bigotry, racism, oppression, discrimination, I want you to speak up when you hear it or see it. I want you to question and identify biases when you see it. I want you to be mindful of your own behaviors. I'd love for you to promote and appeal to higher principles. I would love for you to set limits on what is said and done around you. I'd love for you to seek help and help others to work against bigotry, racism, oppression, sexism, you name it, etc. I want you to remain vigilant and persistent as well. And remember that the impact that you have, it may not be immediate. You know, we talk about this a lot with just like community organizing and things like that. You know, we don't always get to see the work that we do. We don't always get to see the outcome or the end result of some of the work that we start. And that's fine. You know, it could be dramatic, or even on the person you hope in the moment, but it's the only way to create change. So just remember that. That's something that I think that we all need to kind of hold really close to ourselves as we're doing this work, because it gets really heavy. You know, I am the first to say that, you know, doing self-care is extremely important to me, because there are days when, you know, I go really deep with people and, you know, they tell me truths that can also activate parts of me that, you know, I've had from experiences and crises in my life. And I have to also remember that I have to do the work to take care of myself. I have to seek the help that I need. I have to be mindful of my own behavior so that I can continue helping others. So those are all really important pledges that you can do to take care of yourself. What else can we do? I love this. So organizing strategy. We're doing it, we're working on it, we're always ever moving forward to continue to organize and be strategic. One Love Global is, we're all partnered up. You know, we have a multitude of different events that are happening to kind of spread awareness, you know, at all levels, actually. And so that's something that you can always do. Collaborating is essential, you know, collaborating with grassroots organizations, agencies, you know, all levels of local, state, and federal government, collaborating with each other. You know, we all have either specific skill sets, subject matter experts in the work that we're doing. You know, we have friends that are doing work. We can collaborate, you know, with one-on-one, or we can collaborate at the highest level. So making sure that you're doing that as well. Exercising power together. When I typed that, the first thing that came to mind was the 2016 kind of Starbucks direct action as a result of Black Lives Matter and the All Lives Matter response. And so a number of like coffee patrons, they took to giving their name to the barista at Starbucks, and the name was Black Lives Matter. And this is called decentralized repetition, which I think is fantastic. And I think it's something that we can all continue to do over and over again, especially with, like, you know, Black the Vote. I love that. And so what would happen is the barista would ultimately, after the coffee was made, they would have, you know, how baristas do, they hold up the coffee and they're saying Black Lives Matter, because that's the name that you gave them, you know. And I mean, we could give them the name of Sarah or Angela, you know, or Florence or Shani. But when you're doing decentralized repetition and you're trying to make a direct impact, something like that I thought was really, really fair. I thought it was clever. I thought it was necessary. And I thought that it gave Black Lives Matter some visibility that it needed, especially in response to All Lives Matter. You know, obviously it didn't work out completely as well as we wanted it to in the long term, but I think for the short term, it was really wonderful. And all Starbucks did not necessarily participate in that because they decided that they did not want to take a stance in racial matters. So, you know, it is what it is, but it's just, again, things that we can think about as we are doing our own strategic planning, trying to figure out what we could do to make an impact where we are. And then obviously, you know, having sensitivity trainings, doing public outcry, you know, forcing corporations to act. Community engagement is another one. You know, we're doing that actively as we speak. This is a community engagement webinar. And then planning processes. These are, again, the strategic planning meetings that we're having. These are the team meetings that we're having. These are all of the group processes that we're doing. So continuing to do that, you know, and again, you know, we could create a tree just on these alone, on the what else we can do. And we could probably fill it up completely with all kinds of events, all kinds of actions, all kinds of steps that we can take.
Shani, I do have a question. Is this
okay?
Okay, Lillian says, I corrected an elderly white woman who was very misinformed. I was kind about it, but others commented I should give her a break because she doesn't know any better. What do you do?
Okay, Lillian, you said you, well, I guess I probably just feel like I need a little bit more information. Was it a microaggression? Was it racially charged? And then my next question is, why do we need to give, what would be considered giving a break? You know, was it just don't correct her, don't educate her? Because the truth of the matter is I don't necessarily think that educating someone is aggressive. Remember, when we're talking about like communication styles, you know, we have passive communication, we have aggressive communication, and we have assertive communication. And each and every one of us, we have adopted our own kind of style. Obviously, passive communication and aggressive communication is really unhealthy, but asserting yourself is is the healthiest way to communicate. And I also find that people do not like when people assert themselves healthily. It's just essentially saying what you said hurt, or what you said was inappropriate, and let me tell you why. You know, if that's what you did, Lillian, I don't think that you needed to necessarily give her a break.
Yeah, and she said it was very racially charged.
Okay, gotcha. So thank you so much for asserting yourself. You know, a part of our jobs and our roles is to make sure that we let people know that we have boundaries. That is what I was saying and 2 slides ago. It's like, you know, we have to set boundaries, and giving people breaks when they say something that's so racially charged and aggressive. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means, and I don't know if that's something that we should be kind of hanging our hat on, because she's an older woman, but she can learn, you know. And if she learned at the age of 80, isn't that still good? Is that still not a victory for us? Because I know that there are people who are, you know, past a certain age and what we would consider seasoned or mature, who are still trying to figure out how to be in spaces with young people, how to still, you know, honor people who don't look like them. I still know that there are people who are doing the work. So if she's making a conscious decision not to do the work, that's on her. But I'm so glad that you set a boundary and you gave her a moment of clarity and education. All right, so in our last few minutes, I want to just again talk about, is there another comment that we should probably talk about, Sarah?
Lillian just said thanks, and Angela added that she agrees. Thank you, Shani. There is a historical expectation that racial aggression and violence is the burden of the target to bear.
Oof, yes, amen. All right. So inequity is viral, so is liberation. You know, when I started doing these seminars, the the first title that I used was it was viral racism, hashtag viral racism. That was the title of my presentation, and it was Michigan State University continuing education event. I did not get a lot of people, a lot of responses. And the director sent me an email, you know, there wasn't a high attendance, and she sent an email and was like, hey, Shani, you know, this could be really, this is a lot, you know, like there are some people I think that are probably really scared to see something that says viral racism, you know, as a continuing education seminar, you know, can we change the title? And of course, you know, I pushed back, but I also realized that I can't get this information to people if they're too scared by the title. And I think viral racism is a great definition of what racism in this country looks like. So if inequity is viral, so is liberation. And there's a quote here by Cornel West: never forget that justice is what love looks like in public. So we need to think about ways that we can make meaningful change together in the coming days, weeks, and years. And down at the bottom here, I just created a graph that just has 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months. All you have to do as you're kind of moving in your own spaces is start thinking about, you know, what can you do in the next 5 days? Which allies can you connect with to start thinking about ways that you can make an impact right now, today? What about 5 weeks from now? What would the work that you do in 5 days look like in 5 weeks? And then what would the work that you do in 5 weeks look like in five months if you continue to bring people in? So again, this is a deeper conversation, and you know, I wish that we could take a nosedive into it, but you know, time is not allowing us to. But I think that this is general enough that you get the gist. You know, gather your allies, gather the advocates. You know, attend the meetings. You know, start having these conversations. Look at the impact that One Love Global is already having in the community of Lansing. You know, with the people that are working there. You know, we're small but mighty, and I love it. You know, I love the optics, I love the visibility, and I love the growth. It's exponential. So what we can do in 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months is impactful. Martin Luther King Jr. said, faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase. And that to me sums it up in a nutshell. And then we have more good news that changes is happening. And I just kind of put up a picture of Rashida Tlaib and the whole tweeting the thobe. I thought that was just so unique when that all happened. And that was that was January 2019, actually. And then also the amount of women of color that are in Congress as a result of the administration that we have right now. I'm loving seeing all of this. And then obviously the My Brother's Keeper initiative, then President Obama's initiative that he created while he was in the White House, and how impactful and meaningful it is to young people of color, and the work that One Love Global is doing, you know, at the local and statewide level, you know, and how important it is. We are changing, we are becoming change agents. And I think that it's extremely important that we continue to navigate what it looks like to be people who are advocating, who are taking care of individuals, individual personalities, and we're all addressing our own biases. You know, because the greatest danger to white people, especially, is the inability to feel and be empathetic. And you know, as Lillian, as you're talking about the older white lady that you were talking about. I really do. I believe that she was unable to feel or be empathetic. So again, thank you so much for taking care of yourself. I am all done. If you have any questions, I am willing to stay over a little bit longer to answer any questions. But if not, we are at least done with this portion. Thank you all so much for listening to me run on for an hour. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Shani. We have several people sharing their thanks in the chat. Folks, if you do have any questions, feel free to add them to the chat. You're also welcome to unmute your microphone. That's in the lower left-hand side of your control bar. You can also reach out to Shani directly via email. Her email is shani@oneloveglobal.org. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you very much. You all have a great day.